Hey there everybody, Nate Brown here, and welcome to section 5 of my tutorial on how to make a basic animation rig in Blender. In this video we're going to be building the IK-FK switch for the arm, which essentially will give us the functionality to choose between forward kinematics or inverse kinematics for the arm anytime we want. We can do that mid-animation or not. And it gives you great functionality for different kinds of things that you might be having your character do in an animation. So if they're grabbing something, you're going to want to use IK because you want that extra control over where the hand is going to be, or possibly you're having the character rest their hand on something, in which case you don't want the hand clipping through things. You want it to just stay where it is, even if the body is moving around. On the other hand, if the character then goes to walk somewhere, you're going to want to be able to swing the arm easily while they walk, in which case forward kinematics is going to be much more useful. So that's really what our goal here is. And the way we're going to achieve this is, it's going to sound pretty complicated, but it's all going to work out in the end. What we're going to do is we're actually going to create two new arms. And we're going to have three different arms on this guy, all layered on top of each other. The arm that's currently built right here, this arm is going to be our what's called a bound arm. And that arm is going to be what the actual mesh is bound to. Whereas the two new arms we're going to make are going to be our FK and our IK arms, which will be kind of like our controller arms. And then depending on what we choose for IK or FK with a custom property that we'll set up, this bound arm will snap to the rotations of the IK or the FK arm based on what we choose. So, and the IK and FK arm that we're going to build will not be bound whatsoever, so the mesh will not, they'll be non-deforming bones. The mesh will not deform based on where those are. They will only deform based on where this arm is. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to add an extra bone to this current arm and hand that we have right here. So if you're not already in edit mode, get into edit mode for your armature. And then I'm going to grab this hand rotator bone here, and I'm going to duplicate this out. And I'm just choosing this one because it's already parented in a way that I want. It's just kind of already got a couple properties that we want. So it's already parented to the right bone. It's in the right place, that kind of stuff. I just duplicated that with Shift D, and then I pressed Z to snap it to the Z axis and just moved it directly up from where it was. We can just stretch this out a little bit just so it's a little bit easier to grab. Let's rename it. I'm going to name this one Hand Controller. And then we're going to uncheck Deform, because this is a non-deforming bone. Perfect. It's already parented the way we want. If you go into pose mode, you can actually see that if we, rotate this hand around like this, it's already going to stay attached to the hand like that. So that's perfect. What we'll do next is create the FK and the IK arms. So we're going to duplicate our arm bones here, and we're just going to use the bicep, the forearm, and the wrist piece there. So go ahead and select, and then shift select all three of those together there. Go ahead and do Shift D to duplicate, and then you can just right click to snap it back to where it started from, and do that one more time. Shift D and then right click to snap it back. Now we can go into our hierarchy here, and we can open up our root and the spine, go all the way down, keep opening it up until we get down to our arm. So right here, the ones selected here are our these are going to be our bound arm pieces here, and then we've got bicep 1, bicep 1, forearm 1, wrist 1, and then the same thing number 2 right down here. These are our two ones that we just duplicated. Let's rename all of these. So the arm bicep 1, I'm just going to replace 0.001 with underscore FK. And then 002 underscore IK. Perfect. Let's also uncheck Deform on all of these guys while we're at it. Just get all of that out of the way. And what you can do is just go through and select these each, and uncheck Deform, You can also select all of them at the same time. Hold down Alt when you uncheck deform, and it'll uncheck it for all of them. But you can always do it one at a time as well. Now that we've taken care of that, our next step is going to be to clean things up a little bit, make it a little bit easier. We're obviously not going to be able to select the things that we want very easily here, except with going through the hierarchy, but I want to clean that up a little bit and show you how to use your layers for things like this. So, our current arm, our bound arm, we can leave that right where it is. It's on the main layer, which is just what we've already been seeing here this whole time. But we want our FK and our IK arms to be on a different layer. So with the FK arm, select your bicep, and right down here in relations, we've got all these little boxes here, and these are different layers. And you can change which layer something shows up on just by clicking on a new layer. So I'm going to click on the second layer for this, and you can see it kind of disappears. And that's because it's moving over to that second layer. We're going to do the same thing with the IK. Again, with this, you could select them all at the same time. Hold down Alt when you click the layer and it'll move them all at the same time. These ones I'm going to move to the third layer. So now, if we want to change which layer we're looking at, you just have to go into your Armature tab over here, the one that looks like the running stickman, and you can click on the different layers here. So this is our first layer, that's where everything is currently. We can select the second layer and we see our FK arm, and the third layer we see our IK arm. You can also shift select these different layers to make them show more than one at the same time and things like that. That can be useful as well. Next, let's get our IK arm set up. So go into layer 3 and let's select our IK arm here. We have to build a pole for the elbow to point at, and we also need an IK handle. So grab the nub here next to your wrist, in between the wrist and the forearm, that is. Press E to extrude it, and then I'm just going to hit Y so it goes directly backwards. Just pull it out far enough that it's easy to grab. Do the same thing with the elbow, E and then Y, just to make sure it goes directly backwards. Then select these guys. Let's rename them. So this one can be arm IK handle, and then this one can be arm IK pole. We need to unparent these, so I'm going to select this one, and you can go through the I believe it's the Armature tab, but we can also just do Alt P to clear parent, and we're going to just clear parent. Another way of doing that is in the bone menu here. You can just hit the little X here next to parent. It'll clear out the parent. Now this IK handle we want to keep directly right there. The pole we're going to want to move back. Just move it a good ways back. It doesn't have to be a specific range backwards or anything like that. I think something like that is probably good. Let's uncheck deform on both of these. Make sure that we have that undone. And now those should be all set. And they're also showing up on the third layer, which is good because we want them along with all of the IK bones. So now what we can do is select your forearm. We're going to go into pose mode to add the IK. So select the forearm. Down here we're going to go into this constraint properties tab. Add bone constraint. Inverse kinematics. Our target is going to be armature. And then the bone that comes up underneath that is going to be that arm IK handle that we just created. And the pole target is going to be armature, and then the bone that pops up is going to be arm IK pole that we just created. It's going to mess it up a little bit, but our chain length needs to be changed to 2. That should pop it back into the place for the most part. The rotation is definitely going to be different on this one. It's pointing directly down for me, and that makes sense because of the way that we had this angled when we built it. We built this in a way so that this nub here would rotate our arm at the point that we wanted for the shoulder, but then moving the shoulder or the elbow into the center of the arm where it should rotate from, that created a bit of an angle on the elbow. And this is why I only wanted the elbow to bend in one axis, because at this point, if it were bending in multiple axes, then it would make the pole angle much more complicated. It wouldn't just be multiples of 90. It would be a much more specific number that would be harder to work with. And when we get a little farther into this, when we start having the bound arm copy the IK or the FK, it's going to become a lot more important that we did do it this way. That's not to say it's impossible, it just makes it a lot harder to make things transition correctly from IK and FK if we have different strange angles in there. So now for our IK, our pole angle, it should be 90 that you need to change it to get it to face the right direction here. Let's check that out. Excellent. So yours should be the same as mine if you built this in the same way with that one bend kind of upwards on it. It might be a different multiple of 90 though if your skeleton ended up being a little bit different. So change it to whatever you need it to be for the elbow to point back towards your pole. And then we need to make it so that the hand will copy the rotation of the IK handle. So we're going to grab we need to go back into edit mode. We're going to grab our wrist bone here, and we're going to parent it to the IK handle. So grab your wrist bone, then shift select the IK handle. We're going to do Control P, and we are going to do keep offset. Then to make sure, just like what we did with the foot, just to make sure that the hand doesn't get torn off by this, we are going to select the hand, go back into pose mode, and the hand here, we're going to add a constraint on it of copy location. And our target's going to be armature, and the bone is going to be arm, forearm, IK. Make sure you do the IK one. It's going to snap to the elbow point. We just have to have it go to the tail instead of the head over there. So change tail/head to 1.0, and that'll bring it right up to here. And now we should have the functionality we want for the IK. You move this around, the elbow points in the right direction. We can move the pole around, that moves the elbow around, and when we rotate this, the hand will rotate along with it. One last test is just to see that if we pull this out, the hand doesn't get torn off. That's important as well. All right, perfect. Now let's go back into edit mode, and let's go into our armature. Let's go to layer number 2. This is our FK arm. Our FK arm actually is already set up the way we want. If you go into pose mode with it and you rotate it around, FK is really the default of the way that bones work. So you really shouldn't have to change anything on the FK arm. It's already going to rotate the way we want for everything. Now what we need to do is add some constraints to the bound arm to make it follow the rotations of either the FK or the IK, whatever we choose. So let's go into layer number 1. We can stay in pose mode because we'll need that here. Select your bicep, go down into your constraints menu, and we're going to do a copy rotation constraint. We're actually going to do 2 of them, so you could add both right now if you want. We'll add in our targets in a second. So we've got our 2 copy rotations here. I'm not going to change the names on them because we only have 2, but you can always change names on these constraints as well if you have a lot going on. Our target's going to be armature. Our bone on this one is going to be bicep FK, and then on the bottom one it's going to be armature and then bicep IK, because we want it to follow one or the other. Right now the influence is 1.0 on both of those, so I believe that means it's going to, I think it's the bottom constraint that it always goes with first if there's conflicting things between different constraints. So it's probably following the IK right now, but we are going to add a driver to this in a moment that is going to make it so that we can change which one it is following. You also see that our hand is rotated. We'll address that in just a second though. Next, grab your forearm. Let's do the same thing, add constraints, 2 copy rotations, and it's going to be armature and then forearm FK and armature and forearm, whoops, forearm IK. Perfect. The reason that it's rotating like that on the hand is because we have the IK is set up in a way that it had to be rotated backwards in order to follow the pole correctly, and we're gonna have to mess around with our rotations on our bones in just a second because of the way we built the arm, which unfortunately was necessary just to get the right movement. It does mess with the rotations, and unfortunately when Blender interprets IK rotations, it gets a little confused, or maybe too complicated. Maybe it's above what I'm understanding, but it does get a little complicated when you're working with rotations with Blender and IK. But that's okay. I've found a solution for it. Most of the time, just messing around with rolls on your bones and pole angles and things like that. You can always get it to work the way you want. So I'm just doing the same thing on the wrist. We're doing 2 copy rotations. Our target is armature, and then we want wrist FK and armature and wrist IK. Perfect. So that should be good right there. You'll see the hand switched back. That is because on the IK, the forearm and the bicep are both rotated backwards in a way that makes them point at the pole. The wrist, however, its rotation is dictated by the IK controller. So the wrist is kind of always going to be facing the right way. So that's actually okay. But we are going to still have to change some rotations of these 2 bones to make sure that nothing rotates in a weird way. We'll see that a little more obviously in just a second when we're able to switch back and forth between IK and FK. So next what we're going to do is we're going to add that functionality to be able to switch back and forth. So let's click on our hand controller that we created. And in the hand controller, we are going to add a custom property. So you want to go to your bone properties tab here, and make sure you're still in pose mode here, because you can add different properties on edit mode and pose mode, but we'll want this one to be in pose mode because it's something that's going to be used during animation. We can close some of these down so we can see a little bit better. But we're going to go into custom properties down there at the bottom, and you're only going to see an add button here unless for any reason you've added one already. We're going to hit add. It's going to add a custom property called prop with 1.0 as its value, and then we just have this edit button and this little minus button, which is how you delete it. So go ahead and hit edit on our property, and it's going to open up this little window with a bunch of different options in it. We're going to go over all these options and all the information about custom properties a lot more in depth in section 7. So for now, all we're going to do is we're going to change the property name here to IK/FK, because this is going to be our IK/FK switch. And then we can change the property value to 0.0. Just make sure you have it at 0.0 rather than just 0, because that is an important detail. Go ahead and hit OK. And we can now use this to drive the influence on our arm that we just added on. Our rotation constraints, that is. So what you can do is right click on your slider here, copy as new driver, and now we can go into our bicep, go into your constraints, right click on the influence of this top one here, and we can do paste driver. And it's going to turn purple like that. It's also going to go to a value of 0 because it's copying the custom property that we just created. So when we change that custom property, it's going to change this to the same value that we changed the custom property to. Do the same thing for your bottom one here, paste driver. Do the same thing for your forearm, paste driver, and the same thing for your wrist, paste driver, paste driver. Now there's one more thing we need to do, because we obviously don't want these to be the same value. We want them to be opposite values. We want, when this one is 0, we want this to be 1, and vice versa, and everything in between. We want them to be opposite on a 0 to 1 scale. So the way you do that is we're going to have to use a tiny bit of code. So what we're going to do is, why don't we leave this one as the 0 up there, and we'll change this bottom one to be the opposite of that. So right click on the influence for the IK down here. We're going to do edit driver. It's just going to bring up this tiny little menu here. And you can do a lot of stuff in here. we're not going to do anything too crazy here, but we are going to change this type to scripted expression because we want to add a tiny bit of script in here. And now Blender uses Python for its programming language, so if you know a lot of Python, that's great. If not, if you want to know how to do something in Python, I guarantee you can just look it up online and someone will have an answer for you on exactly what to write in there. So what we're going to do for our expression is we want this to be the opposite of what the other one is. So essentially what we can do is, how do we get the opposite of, like, how do we get a 1 when that's 0, a 0.5 when that's 0.5, and so on and so forth? Well, we can subtract 1 from that. It gives us the right number, just a negative of it. So what we can do is we can use an absolute number expression to change that negative number to a positive after we subtract 1 from it. So what we're going to do is we're going to do ABS, which is absolute. We're going to open parentheses so that the IKFK is within the parentheses. And then we're going to subtract 1 from IKFK, and we're going to close parentheses. So what we've got here is IKFK minus 1, so the value there, minus 1, so in this case it's 0, minus 1 is negative 1, and then we take the absolute value of that, which is 1. It just takes away any, it takes away the negative off of it. So now we've got an expression that when we feed 0 into it, we end up with 1. If we feed 1 into it, still end up with 0. 0.5, we end up with 0.5, everything in between. So that should be perfect. So now what we can do is update dependencies, and you'll see down here, this has changed to 1 now, and this one is still at 0. I'm just going to go in there real quick one more time because I want to copy this. You should do the same. Just copy this expression because we're going to put it on the forearm and the wrist as well. Now what we can do is click on the forearm. On our bottom one, the one that we have connected to the IK, we're going to go into Edit Driver, change our type to scripted expression, and then we can just paste our expression that we just created into there. Do the same thing for the wrist. Edit Driver, change our type to scripted expression, and the expression we can just paste in there, update dependencies. And now we have this so that our bound arm will always follow the arm that we tell it to, the IK or the FK. So if we were going to go in here and just to demo this out, I'm just going to grab our IK arm here and move it into a different position. Put that something like that. Our FK arm could just stay the way it is, that's fine. And then we go into our hand controller with our IK-FK controller, and we can scroll this back and forth, and our arm will go back and forth between the two arms. Now what I was talking about earlier with the rotations that we're going to need to fix, there is an issue here. As you can see, our elbow should be facing this way on FK, and it's clearly facing this way on the IK as well. But when we switch between these two, the bicep and the forearm kind of rotate in a weird way, which is making his elbow bend the wrong way. So what we need to do is we need to adjust some rotations. And I found a couple ways to do this. The cleanest way that I found to do it is to adjust the roll on the bound arm and the FK arm, and just to leave IK with just that pole rotation that we added onto it. So what we're going to do is, let's move this back to 0 or 1, either way is fine. Let's move our IK back to where we want it. Okay. And we need to go into edit mode for this. Let's put ourselves only on layer 2, so we just see our FK arm. Select one of your FK bones here. We're going to do this for all of them, so any of them is fine. Make sure you're in your bone properties, open up transform, and you have this thing here called roll. Roll is kind of like the rotation of the bone. If you scroll with this, you'll see it kind of rotating around like that, right? Now what we want to do with this is we are going to change this to -90. So we're sort of offsetting the weird angle that Blender forced us to change on our IK arm. because Blender made it so that we had to change our pole angle in the IK arm. It kind of messed up the rotation of everything. But what we're doing is we're changing the rotation on this stuff so that it kind of matches what we already have on the IK arm, or what we had to change the IK arm to. So we're changing roll to -90 on both the bicep and the forearm. Not the wrist though, because the wrist is, the IK actually has the wrist facing the right direction because it's bound to the way the IK handle is rotated. So that should already be all set. Switch back to layer number 1 with our bound arm, and we have to do the same thing on our bound arm. Switch that to -90 and -90. Now if we go back into pose mode, this should be working the way that we want. So I'm just going to shift select all of our layers so that we see everything. And again, I'm just going to move my IK arm out, and let's see what happens. Let's grab our hand controller and our IK FK, and now when we rotate this, his elbow bends in the right way. We got no rotation for the bicep and the forearm, which is excellent. Now one more thing, one little thing that we're going to clean up here is if you look at the wrist while we do this, watch the wrist and see how it kind of rotates a little bit as it goes between the two. It really shouldn't be though, right? Because our FK and our IK wrists are both the exact same rotations, so there shouldn't be any change in rotation in the wrist along the way. And the reason for that is if we go into our relations tab, or relations drop down on our bone properties, it's inheriting its rotation from its parent. This, it doesn't really affect too much stuff most of the time, but in this case I did find that it was affecting our wrist. So let's go into our wrist, uncheck that, and it's going to snap it back into place, which is nice. Let's uncheck it for the forearm and the bicep as well. It makes it transition slightly differently, but I think that any weirdness that this causes outweighs the, or underweighs, I guess, the fixes that it also causes. So now that looks pretty good when it's going back and forth. I'm really happy with that. Let's move everything back into place. We can just kind of zero out the location of our IK handle to put it back to where it's supposed to be. Now there's one last thing that I want to add for the FK arm, just one little piece of functionality. If we look at our character here, and we watch the way he moves when I rotate his chest here. Let's watch this. His entire arm is going to come out, and it's going to rotate really, really stiffly along with his chest, which sometimes that is what you want, but a lot of times you're going to want the FK arm. The IK arm is already going to do this, but the FK arm, you're going to want it to lag behind a little bit. It makes it so that when you're having your character move around, like dancing or even walking, anything like that, when your chest is rotating things, it makes it so you have to do a lot less counter animation to make the arms not swing way too much or anything like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to add 2 more bones, and we're going to kind of detach the FK arm from the body, and we're going to have these bones control the stiffness of the shoulder socket, essentially. So let's go into our layers here. Let's make it so we only see the first layer and the second layer, so our main layer and the one with the FK arm on it. You know what, actually, let's do just the second layer for now so we don't get too confused here. We're going to go into edit mode, and I'm just going to grab just this this bottom piece, this socket piece of the arm here, and I'm going to extrude that out. I'm going to hit E, I'm going to hit Z to snap it to the Z axis so it goes directly upwards, and then I'm just going to do that one more time, actually, and just make the second one a little bit bigger than it. It's going to be hard to see it, but that's okay. Go ahead and put yourself in X-ray mode. If we go up here, you can do that so that you can see both of them. Now what we're going to do is we're going to unparent both of these. So Alt-P to clear parent, and Alt-P to clear parent. And then we're going to, let's rename them. So this smaller one, we're going to name arm socket. So we can go right in here and change that. Arm socket. And the larger one we're going to name arm socket control. Both of these are going to be non-deforming, so uncheck deform on them. Excellent. Now what we want to do is we are going to grab our bicep piece here. Sometimes it can be a little hard to grab it when you're in X-ray mode, so I'm just going to pop out of that just to grab this guy. This one is going to be parented to the arm socket control bone that we just created. So we're actually going to clear out the parent. We can change this to arm socket control. We can you can do it by clicking and Control P, but you can also just change it right in here too. We want arm socket control for the parent for that one. And it's not connected, that means it's with offset, that's fine. Then the arm socket, which is the smaller one, so back into X-ray mode to see that. The smaller one here is going to be parented to the clavicle bone. So you can turn on your layer here so you can see it if you want. And you can just shift select it and everything, but sometimes it's a little easier with X-ray mode on and everything to just find it in here. So just arm underscore clav. And not connected, that's perfect. Excellent. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add a couple of constraints to our arm socket control. So go ahead and select your arm socket control, go into pose mode, and then we're going to go into bone constraints, and we're going to add we're going to add a copy location and a copy rotation. So our copy location is going to be armature, and it's going to be our arm socket. Perfect. That one's just excellent, just like that. We want influence 1.0. That one's done. We're not touching that one anymore. This rotation, though, this is the one that we're going to be able to turn on and off. This is going to be our stiffness of our socket. So we're going to, again, do armature and arm socket. But this one we're going to be able to change the influence on. So just to see kind of what this is going to look like, let's rotate our guy here. And if we're rotated like that, we can change our influence down to 0 or to 1. So 1 gives you that total stiffness that we already saw. If we put it to 0 now, though, let's say our guy's, he's rotating around, maybe he's dancing, or his chest is rotating while he's walking. It just gives you a lot more natural of movement in the shoulder than that stiffness that you get with it at full. That being said, we make it so that you can switch back and forth, because every once in a while you may want that stiffness to be there. Like if your character is spinning around in a circle or something like that, you're most likely going to want that stiffness to be right on there. So the next part is that we're going to make it so that we can control this with a custom property. Go into your hand controller, still in pose mode, make sure you're still in pose mode, go into bone properties, and we can add a custom property down here. Edit that. Let's just call this socket stiffness. Of course, you can name that whatever you'd like, whatever makes sense to you. Actually, let's leave the property value at 1.0 for this, so that by default it's going to start at stiff rather than loose. So that should be good, and minimum 0, max 1, that's all perfect, so we can hit that. Then we're going to right click on our property value here. We're going to copy as new driver. We're going to go back over to our controller, into here, and we're just going to paste this as a driver onto the copy rotations influence. Perfect. So now we can control that from the hand. Now we can control that stiffness. Excellent. And there we have it. We have built our IK-FK switch into our arm, and we have all the functionality we want, so we're happy. Make sure you save your project, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll be talking about how to create a reverse foot rig. Thanks, everybody.